Hey everyone, I'd like to talk briefly about the articles that were assigned for this week's module. The Hone article on the post-Proposition 13 regime and the Beckett-Camerata article on revenue forecasting. Now, while the Proposition 13 article seems as if it is more relevant, the two articles are definitely related. And I'll just briefly go over the main objectives, the main points that authors are trying to convey. Now, obviously, in California, Proposition 13 has had very dire, in some cases dire effects on the revenue structure of the state and of many cities. And while the reasons for this proposition, and at the time in the early 1970s, there were several citizen-driven tax revolts, really highlighting efforts by the public to curb the drastic increase in property taxes that were seen around the country. So we saw, obviously, what happened in California. There are initiatives that have occurred in Massachusetts and Michigan, and this was just a really hot time for this type of thing to occur. And one of the reasons why it occurred in California, as you probably are aware, is that there was a heavy increase of people moving to California, a heavy population increase, which thus really raised the property values and the property rates. So therefore, to keep accord and to keep up with that, the state legislature continuously raised the property taxes, which at the time seemed as if it was a natural fit, but over years it became problematic for individuals and families to either move from their location or to actually purchase homes in California and to stay in the homes that they lived in. So along came the tax and expenditure limitation of Proposition 13. Now, some of the reasons that, or some of the effects of Proposition 13 that we have seen over the years since then. First, the author talks about the legislative acts, a number of legislative acts, the propositions that followed, trying to really curb, what was going on and what was happening within these cities. And as a result, because the property tax is seen and had been the largest revenue generation source of cities, as a result of Proposition 13, what was going to happen. So cities had to become much more revenue diverse. They had to think of different ways to generate revenue, generate streams of money, because the revenue from property taxes were going to be very flat and decrease over time, essentially. So this forced a revenue strategy shift in California, and we see we have seen that the increase in user fees has been a direct result of what happened from Proposition 13. So Proposition 13 set the maximum property tax rate at 1% of assessed value. That was one of the main components, and then another main component of Proposition 13 was that the increase in property value assessments could not could not increase by more than 2% annually. So you would no longer have these huge spikes in property taxes from year to year, which really had become problematic. And it's interesting because in California, property taxes are very stable and very low in comparison to other places around the country. Just as an example, in New Jersey, the property taxes are much higher, much higher, and there's often talk about such or similar initiatives there, but obviously the effects that Proposition 13 has had on education have really stopped a lot of people from going forward with similar tax and expenditure limitations. So one of the main things to take away from this article is the fact that revenue diversification was forced as a result of Proposition 13. And I think this article is a nice way to move into the second article by Saxton and Hone that looks a little bit more specifically at the results of Proposition 13 in California. Now, in terms of the Beckett-Camerata article that looks at revenue forecasting, while the article does focus on 2 Ohio cities. It's important to note some of the results, some of the factors that influence revenue forecasting. And in the findings from this particular article, she found that data quality was very important, and data quantity was important in terms of providing accurate forecasts. And that seems to make sense. If you have more information and more accurate information, you're more likely to provide a very reasonable and very sound revenue forecast. Other things that were, I guess, unique to this particular article were the changes in city tax code which led to maybe an overestimation in some cases and an underestimation of revenue forecasts, just because of the high or the volatile nature of the changes in the city tax code. So, what were the results? Well, essentially, it was viewed that formal revenue forecasting is seen as a better process than an informal process. So if you have strategy, you use various analytical methods. In this case, she looked at some regression analysis. If you have a much more structured process in place, then you're in a better position to make a very informed and much more accurate revenue forecast. Also, she found that in Ohio, as in other cities around the country, the focus became not on providing accurate revenue forecasts, but still on cutting expenditures. So as I mentioned earlier, the importance of a strong budgeting system really require very accurate and very strategic revenue policy and revenue generating stream. So while cutting expenditures is important, the quickest way to generate larger sums of money for whatever purposes is to be much more diverse and to create various revenue streams. Now, one of the things that Camerata also mentioned, Beckett Camerata also mentioned, was that the revenue forecast would be improved if there were to be a weighted system that weighted different revenue sources according to their importance and according to how much was actually generated. And that way you would be able to determine what were likely to be collected over the subsequent year, and in the subsequent year, and in future years. So how does this relate to California? Well, simply stated, creating a very formal and structured revenue stream, a revenue forecast stream, would allow the state to assist cities in determining best ways to generate and sustain revenue over a longer period of time. And without that process in place, it becomes much more difficult, and it becomes much more challenging for cities to meet the needs and to deliver services to the public, because there may be underestimation or overestimation, which obviously is much more problematic, of revenues, which then have much more challenging results, because the local government, in many cases the state, will have to step in and to develop cutback management processes and procedures to ensure that city services or local government services are actually met. So those are the main components of these articles. I wanted to discuss those with you. If you do have questions, if you do have further questions on these articles, or in general with the topics, please let me know, and we can discuss those further. All right? Thank you.